This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Red Bull Racing have fallen off hard. A team that has for so long succeeded in spite of their second driver, be that Gasly, Albon or Perez, is now seemingly paying the price. See, Checo's been complaining about his car for a long time now. Yet you got Christian Horner going on record saying, "We didn't take it so seriously because Max kept winning." That approach works as long as Max keeps winning, which of course now he isn't. And it's Singapore this weekend, so things might be about to get a whole lot messier. My name's Tommo. Let's talk about it. Having a clear number one and two driver does historically deliver more success than trying to accommodate two number ones. The problem McLaren are facing right now. But what we're seeing at Red Bull is I think, quite rare negative byproduct of firmly throwing all of your weight behind one driver over the other. I can't really recollect seeing anything like this before, where your number one driver drives so well they mask a big dormant problem in the car. They drive around it for so long until it manifests in a big way. And if Max hadn't kept winning, Red Bull would have acted upon this problem much sooner than they have. I mean, geez, Max did more than enough winning in 2023. He was 290 points clear of Checo Perez's teammate in P2. Like, that is an insane domination. And look, it's Max's prerogative to push the car underneath him and extract the performance he can, and it was working really well for him. So from a drivers and constructors championship point of view, because they still managed to win it in 22 and 23, the constructors, that's not Max's problem. Like, if anything, that's the ideal scenario for a driver. Win drivers championships, win constructors, and absolutely demolish your teammate. So what is this problem anyway? Obviously, we don't know for sure. Red Bull are going to keep that close to their chest, and maybe they don't even really know, which is, again, part of the problem. Well, here's the full quote from Christian from Amos. "We traced the development history back, and it turned out that the first mistake we made was with an underbody upgrade in 2023 in Barcelona. That was also the Grand Prix from which Checo started to have problems with the car. We just didn't take it so seriously because Max kept winning." And you know what? I get it. I understand why Red Bull would look upon their 2023 season and a problematic car for Checo and not take it seriously. I understand why. Because let's not get it twisted, Red Bull's approach to this ground effect era has been incredibly successful. They won the drivers and constructors in 22, the drivers and constructors in 23. What more can you ask for? This revelation that Checo wasn't taken seriously does not undo the fact that they made the right choice from a competitive point of view to prioritise Max and, you know, follow his lead. If he's happy with the car, well, sorry Checo, you're just gonna have to deal with it. Like, it does make sense. It's harsh, but it makes sense. Say Fernando, when he was succeeding in Aston Martin last year, if Lance started piping up that he wasn't happy with the car, who would you follow? You'd follow Fernando, of course you would. When Hamilton and Bottas in the glory days, Lewis was cleaning up titles, Mercedes cleaning up constructors. If Bottas was unhappy with the car and Lewis was happy with it, so what? Like, I'm sorry, but that's just the way it goes. It's sport, it's competitive, and all that matters is the outcome. You follow the driver that will bring you glory, or you follow the website building platform that will bring you to glory. Today's video sponsor, Squarespace. If you want to build your very own online home, Squarespace is the place to go, with thousands of beautiful drag and drop templates pinned together with the help of Blueprint AI, guiding you in creating human-centric user experience that will result in a website that's just right for you. Portfolio, blog, online store, whatever you need a website for, Squarespace has you covered. It's free to try and only ask for any payment when you want to publish your website live to the world, and when that time comes around, because you know it will, head to squarespace.com/TOMMO'S to get 10% off of your very first website or domain. Checo's been quoted recently talking about his driving style and how that fundamental difference between him and Max accounts for most of the problem here. It wasn't so obvious, the issue with Max's driving style, whereas with my driving style it became a lot more apparent probably since race number 3, Australia, of this season. Christian talks about Checo struggling as early as Barcelona 2023, right? But Australia 2024 was quite a poignant moment this year. Remember, Checo started the year with back-to-back P2s. It was looking good, and with Max Verstappen's technical DNF in Australia, you would hope that Perez would have been able to step up and deliver the win, but he didn't. He finished P5 in the end, 35 seconds behind race winner Carlos Sainz before George Russell had his shot. Sure, Checo bounced back in Japan, in China, and the Miami Sprint in terms of podiums, but he's not been on the podium since. But that's always been the problem, right? Surely, that having two drivers within the same team that have such fundamentally opposed driving styles how are you going to succeed in the long term? Sure, having a dominant car package in the hands of Max Verstappen for 22 and 23 helps mask it, but realistically, they are a bad match. Especially in this budget cap era where you can't afford to spend the money to create two different specs of car to appease both sides of the garage. If you're going to go full send down one development route, of course you're going to listen to Max and let Max lead because he's one of the greatest of all time. I think we're at that point now. I mean, he's been at that team since 2016. He's much younger than Checo. He's much more embedded in that team. Of course, they're going to go in Max's direction. But that recent race last weekend at Baku did demonstrate that somehow, 2.5 years into this ground effect era, there is a permutation of this Red Bull RB20 that Sergio Perez can drive not just as good, but better than Max. When it's a track he likes, Baku, with a lot of traction zones, a lot of 90-degree corners that just suits his way of driving, and a car that Max isn't comfortable in, Checo stepped up. I mean, he could have won that race if Lando hadn't held him up. Absolutely, no doubt in my mind. But the real dilemma is, well, look, the idea of Max Verstappen leaving Red Bull to Mercedes or a newly led Aston Martin, to me, feels more realistic than ever. They've banked so much on Max Verstappen and they've achieved so much with him at the wheel, but that does leave you vulnerable. Who knows who's going to be in that seat alongside Max? There's arguments for Ricciardo, there's arguments for Perez, there's arguments for Lawson, there's arguments for Tsunoda, but none of them have absolutely, put their flag in the sand and been like, this is my seat. Red Bull don't have that. The compromise of having a Galactico like Max Verstappen is that it's very hard to facilitate someone consistently in that second seat who can then step up to the plate if and when Max moves on. Now, if Max was to leave, could Red Bull pivot the development, the direction of this car in a way that works more for Checo? Maybe. And obviously Baku does give some kind of merit to that, but I do think that was more to do with Baku as a circuit. Checo won both the sprint and main race there last year, remember. He does love it around this specific track, so I wouldn't get ahead of myself. And to be honest, even Singapore this weekend, Checo's good around Singapore. I think Austin will tell us more. Look, it's been very easy to dog on Checo recently, right? And unfortunately, he just hasn't been performing anywhere near the level of his teammate, and it doesn't matter who it is. If you're getting absolutely dunked on by your teammate, you are going to attract criticism. You have to call it as you see it, I have to call it as I see it. If the grass is green, I can't call it blue. But this whole revelation from Christian and that massive, just not uptick in performance from Checo, but downtick from Max in Baku just tells us that, look, we don't really know what's going on, do we? We see what the broadcasts show us and what the teams put out to the world, but 99.9% of everything that goes on behind closed doors. We don't see it and we can only speculate, but it's sport, and without fans, sport wouldn't exist. And part of the passion that we all have for this game, why I make these videos and why you watch them, is because we like talking about these things. It's interesting to us because we are fans and we are the ones who keep the sport alive. I just don't know how Red Bull are going to play this from 24 onwards. They've got to hope that whatever this Austin upgrade, not even upgrade, car change is going to be, can fix that car enough that Max can get this championship over the line, get the 24 championship, make himself a 4-time F1 world champion, and just approach 25 as they can, I guess, because it's going to be so competitive from day dot in 2025. I think there's very little chance of Red Bull succeeding at the top. Yes, I still think Max is the best driver in Formula 1, but that car is clearly not in a good place. And this weekend in Singapore, it's going to be firmly damage limitation, surely. I mean, that all-conquering Red Bull RB19 last year absolutely flopped in Singapore. Max was out-qualified by Liam Lawson and AlphaTauri, for crying out loud. Look at where they are relative to the field now, Red Bull in the RB20. They could be scrapping with the Astons and the Williams. Genuinely. But also, something to not get twisted about is that it isn't like Max hasn't been vocal about his own issues with this car. Yes, Checo has been for a lot longer, but Max has still made his point. Post Monza, when asked about some comments that his dad Jos made earlier in the weekend about the team not listening to him, Max said, "There is definitely listening, but it is difficult to find a solution. We are checking things, but that will take longer. It's not like after the summer break, I thought now all of a sudden things are going to go well. We just need time to test and evaluate. It's just unfortunately taking a bit longer than we want." Did Max just say we are checking? Ferrari have got copyright on Max, you can't be dropping that. So what exactly did Jos say? Well, at the beginning of the season when you win races, then of course it all feels right, but he also said that the balance is not right. Of course, that was not brought out at the time, they tried to keep that inside. He complained about the balance there too. Max actually complained about it 3 months ago, which would put it around Monaco/Canada, around 8-9 time based on when this comment was made. Only they didn't really believe it, or they didn't really see it. Now you're actually a bit too late. Of course, Jos has his own perspective on what's going wrong for Max this season, and we know he's got his own complicated relationship with Christian Horner. Let's just leave it at that. But he doesn't have to toe the political line like Max does. You know, of course, Max is famously no BS, but even so, he does need to be selective and careful with his words when he's addressing the team, because ultimately it is the team that are going to get him out of this hole or not. He might be holding up his end of the bargain, but they need to do the same, otherwise he's not going to win this 24 world title. Checo was dealing with these problems from a long time back, Barcelona 23, but as soon as Max started piping up, that should have got the sirens going surely at Red Bull. Because as the rest of the teams in Formula 1 begin to catch up, which was inevitable, I know it didn't feel that way at times in 2023 when Max was winning 10 in a row, but everyone was going to catch up eventually, and any weaknesses were going to get exposed. So as the field has converged, the curb riding problem and the just general stiffness, I think, of that car, it was something they could be complacent about when they were dominant in all other aspects, but they can't anymore. If Checo started complaining in Barcelona 23 and Max started complaining in Monaco 24, that's almost exactly a year where Checo was struggling with the car and Max wasn't. So does this somewhat redeem Checo? Does this explain away his struggles? Well look, we all saw with Gasly, with Albon, just how difficult it was going to be to step into that second seat alongside Max Verstappen. And Checo did enough to help Max, you know, win that first driver's title. However, you go back to the fundamentals and you've got two drivers with very different approaches. Max is out qualifying Checo by 4 or 5 tenths on average, typically, whereas the ideal gap is probably like 2 tenths if you want kind of a clear 1 and 2, but still getting decent constructors points and a decent backup driver, just like Bottas was for Hamilton. Look, Checo ultimately does have to hold accountability for not being able to adjust his preferred style to fit with what this car needs. He has a learned, experienced way of doing things from years in the sport, and he's not been able to adapt, and it works for him seemingly when it's not working for Max. But doesn't that tell you that so often our perspective of a driver is actually massively influenced by not just the speed of the car underneath them, but the style of car underneath them? I always think back to Ricciardo. There's no way Ricciardo fell off like it's portrayed, okay? He was amazing at Red Bull. He was amazing at Renault once he settled in. McLaren, it was just such a different car to drive. Carlos Sainz has spoken about it. Daniel Ricciardo has spoken about it. The way that car was driven. Lando knew nothing else, but Daniel was bringing all this experience in, and all of a sudden it's like, what the hell is this? How am I supposed to drive this? And then that's just completely knocked him off piste. Checo was an absolute menace in that 2020 racing point. In fact, I reckon if Perez had been alongside Lewis as his teammate in 2021 instead of Bottas, I reckon Lewis would have won that title, because I reckon Perez would have done a better job, because Perez was rapid in the Mercedes clone in 2020. He would have been rapid in the 21 Mercedes as well, I'm sure of it. You can't begrudge Checo taking the opportunity that he did at the end of 2020 after being unceremoniously booted out a racing point for Sebastian Vettel, but it's never worked between the two of them. The writing was on the wall after 2021 when, yes, Checo helped in places, but he was still a mile off Max, and he wasn't actually that much closer than Gasly and Albon were. But what this does tell us is that it takes two to tango, and Red Bull have to take their share of the blame. Because Checo's time at Red Bull will ultimately go down as a disappointment, but it's just nice to actually be able to talk about Checo, even though the result wasn't what he would have wanted in Baku, in a positive light. That would have been so nice if he'd have won that race. As much as it was, you know, Oscar thoroughly deserved it. I think he's a quality bloke and he's been dragged through the ringer. Like, I experienced it as an Albon fan in 2020. It's not fun when you're getting dunked on by Max left, right and centre. But there's still a good driver in there. Just not in the Red Bull. And I don't think he ever will get anywhere near his Max in a Red Bull. But the fact that he was fighting for that win in Baku with this car being all over the place shows that he still has something to give, which is, to be honest, I felt like I'd kind of given up hope, but that absolutely has given me some back. As always, leave your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. My name's Tommo. Thanks again, and have a good one. Ta-da.